We're back. UBS turned Google like Googly, Paul Sims, Gilman '03. It was Emory, right? Emory
Yep.
'07.
Yep. Emory Gilman '01, and then
Gilman '01. Shit.
Emory
That's right.
'05. Yep.
Yeah, I was about
Yep.
to say that. He played basketball with us. There was no way he was 03. He's been on our basketball.
I was thinking about my college. I was thinking about my college, and like I don't know why. You were my brother's class, '01 and '05. Oh, man.
When were you at UPS? And what office did I used to work into?
Yep. I was at the 299 Park Building, and was there from 2005 to 2007.
Okay, so I might have audited that building at some point. I was a branch examiner at a building
Yeah.
office around that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. Remember that office? Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
people hated everyone hated branch examiners when they show up.
Yep. Yep. I remember that. I remember that. Small world. Small world. Yep.
So we're at that 2005, 2007. That sounds exactly like post college, which is what we said we start. So go into it, sir.
Yeah. So, well, first, thank you guys for having me. Great to be on. And yeah, I mean, after 2005 from Emory, started at UBS. Actually, got into UBS through a program called Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, which started back in the 80s to really have a focus on placing minorities on Wall Street. And I was fortunate enough to have 2 summers on Wall Street at UBS, and that led to me getting the full-time offer after '05. Did UBS for 2 years, did the 80, 90, 100-hour work weeks, the full shebang, going to the office in 2 feet of snow, trying to get a pitch book to a managing director at JFK, in the middle of the night as he's about to get on the plane, the whole gamut, and honestly realized I couldn't do that for the rest of my life. But at the same time, my now wife and we actually met freshman year at Emory, and I knew I wanted to be with her for the rest of my life, and so I wanted to make sure that I could still pursue a career in finance and then also still have a family at the same time. So literally right after we got married in 2007, come back from the honeymoon, I got an offer to work at a private equity firm in Atlanta, Georgia called Our Capita. And that gave me the opportunity to really spend more time, with my wife and trying to make a family, but then also giving me the opportunity to work around the world, places like Atlanta, London, Singapore, Bahrain, and exposed me to a totally different world. Until I got to Emory, everything that I knew was West Baltimore, Gilman, a little bit of DC, and that was it. And then, fast forward to 2007 to 2011, going to all these different opportunities was a great opportunity. And then, of course, we had subprime crisis, all that fun stuff. Had to make a shift. The company was downsizing and decided to take an opportunity in terms of basically management, and worked at a company called McMaster-Carr for a couple of years, and that actually allowed me to get my executive MBA for free. I'm very grateful for that, with literally no strings attached. And then right as I was wrapping up the MBA, I got a call from Google, which was weird because I thought it was a prank call. They actually cold called me, and it was actually sort of like a first round interview, and I actually hung up on the dude. I thought, it was a joke. I didn't even think it was real. And, but, fast forward 6 months later, because I had to finish up my degree and get all that stuff done. But as soon as I was done, they were like, well, when can you fly out? So the week of Snowmageddon in Atlanta, some folks remember that, when Atlanta was shut down. I was still in Atlanta at the time. I was hopping on a plane as the snow and ice was coming down. So I know my wife is still mad about that because she was stuck with the kids for a couple weeks. But I flew out to Mountain View, did an interview, and got the offer. And it's actually weird. Actually, next week is going to be my 7-year anniversary at Google, which I still can't believe it's been that long. I mean, it's in some ways it's gone so fast, and in some ways I still can't believe it's been 7 years. So that's kind of it, summary wise, career wise, and yeah.
You talk about that call where you're like, the fuck is this? And it's
Yeah.
like, it's not Google on a first round interview.
Yeah. I mean, the dude, and his name is Ryan, and shout out to Hayes. He's a good dude, but he was like, yeah, it's like, is this Paul? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, who's this? He's like, yeah, I got your name from somebody, and he started to go through all these different supply chain questions, because that was a role that he was trying to look to fill at the time. It was around supply chain. It was just throwing out all these like different scenarios, and I'm like, who is this? And I kept asking, I'm like, who are you again? And who are you with? I was like, I know this 415 area code. I think that's the Bay Area, but like, are you sure? I'm like, I was like, how do I know it's you? I'm like, how do I know it's you? Because I'm like typing on my phone at the same time, trying to see,
Look up,
like,
yeah.
okay, this Brian does look at Google, that sort of thing. And towards the end, he kind of went through the whole thing, and I was like, okay, but like for a minute there, I was like maybe 10 seconds away from hanging up on him, because I was on a break. I had to get back at the company I was at the time with the MasterCard. It's sort of a industrial supply company, and so you have to be on the floor 24/7. So I had a quick break. I had to get back, so I was like 10 seconds away from hanging up on the dude, until he eventually got to the end and kind of explained what they were hiring for, the opportunity, that sort of thing. And it was just weird, in the sense that I never thought this great company would just cold call me and just start shooting some random questions at me to try to see, okay, is this guy capable of getting through the interview process? So
it's the interview process is something I've been going over with my kids with. We're talking about specifically resumes, and I'm sure you're familiar with the case study about minorities whitening their resumes, removing certain things, and then that give Asians and Black people mainly who do so. And then the idea of the actual interview process. Part of it was the initial call and then coming in. What do you think was, outside of the obvious, because we've obviously talked about race, what was the impediment, as somebody who before college was, like a lot of us, West Baltimore, Gilman, DC, high school, whatever, leading through college, and then your experience, at UBS, McMaster-Carr, how did it prepare you for that?
Yeah.
Did you view it through a racial lens, or did you view it as, Paul Sims, I know this shit?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely, I can tell you for certain, if it wasn't for groups like Sponsors or Educational Opportunity to kind of tell you, yes, like you will be called certain names. Yes, it is going to be hard for you to get promoted because of the color of your skin. But here's what we can do to try to work for it. If it wasn't for that, I mean, I don't think I would have survived, to be honest, because I think part of the reality with Sponsors of Educational Opportunity was, while their objective is to obviously place, people of color, into these companies, it was also recognition that, it's not going to be easy, and that racism still exists in a lot of these companies. And so, I mean, it was intense. I mean, when I first got there for training with SEO, that's their acronym. I mean, it was pretty intense, because they were trying to prepare you for what the reality was going to be like. And in some cases, it wasn't fun, but, they did explain that, once you come out of the end of that process, right, it could be something very special. And so I think going into that opportunity for UBS, it was important because I had somewhat of a mentor to help me, get through that process. And to your point, we were talking about earlier of like I said, you do have to find some people in the organization to kind of help you, get through the promotion process and how you get evaluated, that sort of thing. Those were tools that were taught to me, early on before getting thrown into that environment, so that I could survive. And now you fast forward to Google. That's a challenge that I think Google has today. And I know we can get a little bit, into that. And, hopefully, if you can get April Curley on. I'm not sure if folks are aware of April Curley. She's very near and dear to me. I worked with her for a little bit at Google for a little bit. She was unfortunately fired, recently. And if you read her Twitter feed at Real Abril, she goes into real detail. She's got some receipts. I'll just say that. She's got some receipts on what was happening, and it's heartbreaking for me personally, just because I know her very well. She's from Baltimore. I think she is actually back in Baltimore now, running a program up there now. But that's one of the biggest challenges with Google, where I think they tried to do something like what SEO was doing for Wall Street, but I think it failed, in many ways. And I think that's sad in the sense that I feel like a lot of the people that are trying to get into companies like Google, right, don't have that preparation and tools ready to kind of successfully get in, like I had with SEO in Wall Street.
Yeah. So you're there now. You've been there for 7 years. Have you developed a mentor relationship with somebody that's more senior there? And do you have a mentee relationship with somebody or people there? Because to your point, the other case study we went through, I pretty much told them that if they go the corporate route, being Black men mostly, like other minorities and women, they aren't going to be fast tracked at what's known at that stage 1 level.
Yeah.
So they're really going to have to go hard there. Then once you get to stage 2, there's like pretty much the difference between plateauing out in middle management and reaching stage 3, the executive level. The mentor, you got to have somebody who's fighting for you. Who's looking out? So can you talk about those relationships that you've developed there and their importance?
Certainly. I think at every company that I've worked at, I've tried to have some degree of mentorship. Trying to find a mentor, trying to find mentees, because I know for me to be in any of those companies, that was one of the biggest ways I was able to survive. And so in the case of Google, for example, I actually just talked with one of my mentors today. He is actually now at Google. One of the things they have is they have some different mentorship programs, and so I was able to participate in one where they paired me intentionally with a mentor. And while it wasn't targeted at people of color, it was targeted for people at certain job levels that were having challenges getting up to the next level. And so I was paired with a mentor who is basically sort of the CFO of the company I work at now within Google, called Google Fiber. And I meet with him regularly in terms of, getting guidance and advice on certain issues and topics and that sort of thing. And, it's a sort of relationship where, this is actually a white person who is from England and has a totally, different background, different experience, but also is somebody who is in the weeds with a lot of things that's happening within the organization, has a lot of connections, has a lot of foresight into what's happening, what works, doesn't work, that sort of thing. But then I also pair that with a mentorship that I also developed outside of a mentorship program. And that was through some of the Black leaders that are currently at, Google. And so one of my other big mentors is a gentleman named Terrell Gosa, who joined Google Fiber a few years ago. And he's one of the senior leaders within Google Fiber. And I also meet with him regularly as well. And, I think for him, he's had, decades of experience in the telecom industry and that sort of thing, but just has a passion around minority mentorship and leadership development. And, we, I ironically met because his first week on the job, he was in Nashville. So I showed him around, I showed him our fiber network and that sort of thing. And it turned into a brief conversation, into a meeting every couple of weeks. And it was everything from tell me what's going on family wise to, what do you think about promo? What are some of the things you need to think about? Or, hey, here are some of the challenges that you're going to face, when you get into promo and that sort of thing. And because I've been able to meet with them on a regular basis, I think these are people that have sort of helped me along the way to kind of shape, okay, how do I manage, getting promoted or moving up in the organization, or trying to navigate through a hodgepodge of senior leadership bureaucratic BS that, comes, left and right. managing certain teams with different dynamics, that sort of thing. And these people were sort of key for me. And again, that was at Google. McMaster-Carr was the same way, for sure, at UBS, because, again, at UBS, again, thrown into an environment where you're just called all sorts of names. The ability to be a high-ranking analyst as a person of color was very low, like 2-3% wise, that sort of thing. And, again, if it wasn't for those people just meeting on a regular basis and just chewing that stuff and just throwing stuff out like, hey, how do I deal with this? These are folks along the way that kind of helped me along the way. And as I was just talking about today with somebody, it's like, my mom would always, say the acronym, it takes a whole village to raise a child, that sort of thing. And, these mentors were certainly my sort of village to kind of help me along the way at these different steps. And then my hope is, to try to pass that on, right, to the next folks. And so as I work, through my day-to-day job, part of it is like doing my work, but then also taking what I've learned and trying to say, okay, for the next folks coming through, what can I continue to pass through?
We're gonna have Ashley Tuck from We'll Drink for Travel on to talk about traveling and being kind of sort of a Black travel broker, and what it means to travel, vacation as a Black person. You have worked. Now, it's not just traveling. You've worked in several foreign countries, right? What was that like?
Yeah, man, it was crazy. For one, it showed how dumb I was. I fly from New York straight to Singapore, get off the plane thinking I could just hop into the office. It's 9 a.m. Singapore time when it's like, I don't know, 10, 11 p.m. East Coast time, thinking I was going to be wide awake. So that was mistake number one. And then number two, I'm wearing a full suit, walking around the streets of Singapore. And of course, it's 90 degrees, 90% humidity. And, I'm just fully drenched in sweat. And everybody else, of course, is like, they're not even wearing a full suit. They got shirts on, and, that sort of stuff. And that's it. No ties, that sort of stuff. So I think in some ways that was a hard lesson for me, because a lot of times it was like working in Singapore was sort of like a last minute sort of thing. It was like, hey, we got this deal that we're working on. Can you help out? And it turned into this like one mini project into sort of this like multi-month thing where I had to get acclimated, pretty quickly. But it just shows sometimes that like, I just walk into the situation. I'm like, man, like I'm just starting off on the wrong foot. But, again, like, that was just something where I just, in these situations, you just had to learn quickly. Same thing in Bahrain, in Bahrain, it's a type of situation where,
dude, Bahrain is one of those countries that's in like it's like, like all 200 and like all 190 countries in the world like have this, and like it's like not Bahrain though. Like we were on a couple of lists under Trump with Bahrain as far as like not in treaties and stuff like that.
Yeah. So like this an environment where, of course, like weather-wise it's hot all the time, culture-wise it's totally different. The interactions, are totally different. We were at a party one night, and I guess there the custom is once it's over, like the way they kick you out is they put smoke underneath your jacket, while you're there. And the more they do it, like the worse the smell it is. Like it smells terrible. And I was like, I didn't get the message. So I'm just like sitting there the whole time, like partying. And of course they're like, no, you gotta get that guy out of here. But it's just things like that, it was just a totally different experience, just in the sense that it gave me an opportunity to really see how the world operated, outside the U.S. in the sense that, in some instances, one, it helped me understand how, we as Americans are fortunate, in certain circumstances. And I think that was something I appreciated as I was in these different places. But then also just, understanding just a totally different way and just how the world works. This is an area where, a lot of people we were meeting with were people who have had, oil fields for centuries, passed down through families and customs and traditions and, that sort of thing. And so to see that, and then also, paired with an environment where in Bahrain, there are also a lot of expatriates that come in as well. And so you're in this environment where you've got a lot of people locally that you're working with, but you also have a lot of expatriates and their families. And it's just a totally, different ecosystem. And then, by the way, the U.S. has their fifth fleet, which is one of their biggest, naval fleets, just sitting, down the street, which, has, lots of Americans there as well. And oh yeah, by the way, Iran is just, across across the water as well. And so, it's just a, interesting environment where you have all this stuff happening, at the same time. That's totally different from where we were in the US. And so that definitely changed my thought process from a more sort of domestic thought process to sort of international in scope, in terms of like how things work, how I make an impact as a person in this world, that sort of thing.
I don't want to dominate the conversation because I have questions. So if anyone want to chime in?
One of the interesting things that Google has done that I've seen, even advertised at the beginning of the pandemic, was Google is starting to offer a lot of different programs for certificate that they'll count as a college degree versus someone going to traditional university. That's important, especially in our community, because a lot of us don't have the opportunity or the financial ability to go to school to get a graduate level degree, even undergraduate degree. Is it an accurate thing to say that Google is moving in that direction, where they'll use your work experience in conjunction with the certificate programs that you offer to help people get employed within your company to help build their resume?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a lot of bad stuff, Google has done, as it's seen recently by some of the recent firings. But as you said, I think that's one of the things I think they got right, or getting right, and there's a good example. There's a commercial that they actually filmed in our office that they've shown nationally now, where there was a Black lady who went through that program, who now is a program manager for one of the new data centers we have in the state of Tennessee. And I mean, her story is incredible. If I find it, I can, send it to you guys so you can see it. Sure. But, single Black mother, it was the situation was pretty bleak. But, she was looking and searching, found the opportunity to get the certificate. And I mean, it just, sort of catapulted her. And sometimes, right, you think sometimes, oh, this is sort of the token story, right? And that, maybe this doesn't happen across the board. But from what I've seen now, if you go to different data centers, if you go to cloud now, that you're seeing a lot more stories like this, that I think could be a good story. And as you said, is not only helping people to get into a company like Google, but also showing that these people can stay in Google and also move up the ranks, because that, has been also, unfortunately big challenge at Google is, once people of color get in, that's great, but they're not staying. It is tough to get through the ranks. Like, I'm actually going through a promotion cycle right now. And, when I talk about a village, like, I've got three Black folks now that have, pitched in to help get my promo packet together, just because of everything that's been happening in the world these days and the recent firings, that sort of thing. It's almost been sort of all hands on deck to try to get, and try to retain people of color within Google, to move on, because it's been a challenge retaining, folks of color. And I don't know if y'all know Terrence Whitehead. He actually just started, at Google recently, and that was one of the things I talked. Yep, he did just started, and I talked to him. I was like, that's one of the biggest things. I said, to keep an eye on, just because they're just having such a challenge. And so, again, getting back to the certificate programs, that's one of the ways I think Google's tried to identify, specifically for Black folks, people of color, to how to bring those folks in and how to keep them at the company and help them grow with the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mia, Autumn, Nicole.
Yeah, I have a question. Do you feel as though Google actually creates a space that's conducive for people of color to be able to exist long term? Or do you feel it's a matter of, once you're in the door, either you sink or swim, and there's no network that's provided to help advance people of color and women for that regard? Do you feel like that's a space that's provided?
Yeah, not yet. And to that point, specifically for Black women, they actually had a Black women's conference for the first time a few years ago, where they brought basically all Black women across the globe from Google into a summit. And Sundar, he actually came to the summit. I call him Uncle Sundar, but when he came, it was almost a statement in itself because you could fit everyone into one room, right? And if you think about how many employees Google has right now, and the fact that they could all comfortably fit into one room, that was a problem in itself, right?
Yeah.
And so they really, really talked about that. And I wasn't at the conference, but there were two Black women who work in my office that were there that came back and just talked about how, one, I think it kind of confirmed for them that they weren't the only ones that were going through issues, around gender discrimination and racial discrimination and that sort of thing, and that it was just across the board. And again, because it was fitted in one room, like us, pretty much everyone had a story, which was pretty impactful in itself. Where they said, they were all saying, for Sundar, it was like, wow, this is, this is pretty deep. And the hope is, right, that you take a lot of these stories and convert it into action, right, going forward, so it can be a more comfortable environment. And I think the sad part is, in some ways, while I think he recognizes these issues, I think it's been a challenge to try to tactically move that forward. And I think we're still in some of these same scenarios where you can still fit, all the Black women into one room. They still have, all these different stories, be it, April Curley, Timnit, who was, just fired as well. And, again, it doesn't produce a really good, narrative right now. And so, as you said, I think it's, for a lot of folks, it's survival. And, again, when I talked with Terrence and he first started, some of the things we kind of talked about, as he got started. Yeah.
Have there ever been any efforts just among the employees to, and maybe they already exist, but like different companies have employee resource groups?
Yeah.
So it's like, are those groups,
Yeah.
you can only fit, if you can fit people into just one room, it just, I don't know, it seems like it might be hard to do that, but is that an option? And are those groups more involved with like saying, okay, we got everyone together, we had the necessary discussions, great, but what are the next actionable steps?
Yeah, good question. So there are several ERGs, and there is one large ERG called the Black Googler Network, BGN, which is pretty large, and they do a lot of big things. They just had Colin Powell today, and they have all these prominent folks that come in for different things, and it's a pretty powerful network. I will say that. To your point, it is interesting to see as Google grows, where, as you said, it can be such a large group to try to move it forward. It can be a challenge. So, for example, at Google Fiber, which is, to kind of step back for a little bit, Google was Google for a long time. Then a few years ago, they created this entity called Alphabet. And so if you think of like Warren Buffett, he has Berkshire Hathaway and he invests in different companies. That's the way sort of, I call them Uncle Larry and Sergey, but Larry and Sergey, the co-founders of Google, were kind of thinking about the future for Google, where they would have this holding company called Alphabet, and they would have these, what they call different bets, where they would invest money, Google obviously being the biggest one. And I fall in a company called Google Fiber, which is a bet that reports up to Alphabet. And we have our own ERG now for it's called the Fiber Black Googler Network, right? Where we specifically, focus on certain things focused around EID related to efforts specifically, at Fiber. And so I think going forward, that's going to be interesting, because I can already tell even within BGN, while it's a very impactful group, it is, pretty large at this point. And so as the company is growing, I think there's a question around how ERGs can kind of continue to try to make that impact, in a way that kind of drives, sort of the message home. I think the other thing that's also happened is, I can talk about it at the Google Fiber level, is there's an effort to try to, what's the best way to say it, kind of unify the ERGs going forward, right? To be an even more, forceful group. And so they've created this sort of concept around, like, they call it tapestry, where it's like, you've got your Black Googler network, you've got the Vets Googler network, you've got the Women Googler network, right? And try to combine that in a way to try to move forward. So whether it's the George Floyd incident or most recently, with elderly Asians, right, getting assaulted, for no apparent reason, right? There's a way to kind of saying it's like for the fiber Asian Googlers, right? It's not just them feeling and carrying the weight. It's like, we as a group of ERGs, right, can find ways to try to support and that sort of thing, because ERGs can be helpful, but right, they have to be very intentional. It has to be impactful, in a way that it helps, drive the business forward, creates, overall good environment, as we just talked about earlier, where people feel comfortable coming in, as they are, and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that, first of all, before I prematurely try to end this, because this is for hours. I have so many questions, so many things on relate. Did anybody else have any questions before we get you to plug something that you want to plug?
So Amazon, as we know, just saw their first union happen.
Yes.
It was in Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
What do you think the probability is, due to what we just talked about, the recent batch of firing like that? Do you think that any unionization within Google could ever happen?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago. And there's a website, I think that's up. I need to find the website, but yeah, there are people within Google now that have announced that they want to start a union. And I believe now it's at least a couple hundred people and still growing. I think it's actually probably in the thousands potentially now. So they have started that process. I will say it is going to be fascinating to see how this goes. At the same time, while this is happening, and I think the seeds were planted for a while. I think the question was not only a matter of if, but when, they would start going down this process. The other interesting thing is Google at the same time has also hired, as I understand, a lobbyist who specializes in anti-unions and breakups and, that sort of thing. And I actually think that's what sort of triggered them to actually go ahead and start it. So they have a full website. They've got a full list of people who have signed up. They're collecting names, right now. There's still a question, I think, for folks like myself who technically aren't in Google Inc., but are in Google Fiber, whether or not if we want to sign up, could we participate with them and that sort of thing. So I think they're still kind of working, that piece out for the other, quote unquote bets. But yeah, for people like in Google that work on search, and YouTube is still part of Google, for all them, they can unionize, and, it has, gained a lot of momentum. I will say that, internally, there is a lot of strong support from it from an employee perspective. And, the management has been pretty quiet, up to this point. They've kind of, put out the standard, statements and, that sort of thing. But I'm waiting to kind of see tactically, what they're going to do next, because it's out there now. They're like, we're going to unionize, we're going to start to get folks together, we're going to sign them up. People even put it, internally. We've got, photos of ourselves, internally in our directories. People now put, the AFL-CIO logo, right, on their images, that sort of thing, just to, make statements. So, I mean, it's happening, and it's going to be interesting to see, corporately how the company reacts to that. Yeah, for sure.
Well, if there isn't anything else, I kind of have a feeling, because you were talking about the mentorship program beforehand. Is there anything you wanted to plug or anything you wanted to leave the audience with before we end today?
Just again, appreciate the time. I'm a type of person that's a little bit old school in some ways, in terms of appreciating folks that have sort of gone before me. So yourself, Walter, Sean, others, from high school that have sort of blazed the trail. I appreciate you guys. I salute you guys. If anyone is ever in Nashville, come, feel free to come see us, our family. Appreciate my wife, even though she's probably upstairs getting our kids to bed now. She's the first responder, so she's been on the front lines with COVID-19 now, and so I pray for her every day, salute her every day. We've been married now for 13 years. We'll celebrate 14 years in June. And, also lastly, I'll just say, thank you to all the Black Gilman alumni who have been supportive, for me and been mentors as well. I did want to give a quick shout out to MJ Austin, Gilman alum. For those that don't know, actually recently just lost his son this morning, only 23 years old, but was a stockbroker, at Alex Brown. And so when I think about, trailblazers and investment banking and that sort of thing, I personally feel I wouldn't be able to be in those positions without folks like him, Vernon Reed, another Gilman alum who was, very successful at T. Rowe Price.
Vernon Reed mentored me at T. Rowe. He's a really good man. He's also a donor. He's also a donor at St. Francis now, also.
Yep. And I mean, all around good guys. So I'm very much appreciative of them, and I'm definitely keeping MJ Austin family and thoughts and prayers, on their recent loss. But I think that's it. Otherwise, I appreciate this forum. Next time you need to interview me first, because I'm still tripping over plies and all that sort of stuff. So we got to reverse it next time. But really appreciate the time.
Yeah. Paul Simpson, it was really a pleasure. The brothers and sisters here, and thank you for coming on the podcast, and hopefully we will have you again soon. What I'm thinking about doing is having like a forum of guests or whatever, talk about some of the issues, maybe having a conference or something like that once this COVID stuff gets to. There's a lot of people to my delight and surprise, or like, you want to come on? I'm like, everybody has a podcast now. And I'm like, yeah, come on. And so thank you for that. I'm gonna stop recording now.